At this stage, conventional war is what we see, conventional media as well. But also now what we have to handle is the consequences of this situation. So as we know, economy is at stake, but also social cohesion in Europe, etc. And it is true that it's a communication war, it's an opinion war.
Hello and welcome to a new edition of Connecting the Dots with Sebastian Gochinescu. Today, I have with me a very important and special guest. It's Her Excellency, the French Ambassador to Romania, Laurence Auer. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for taking the time. You are a very busy person, as I can see, and it's going to be a very interesting conversation today about geopolitics, technology, and, of course, blockchain.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be with you as your guest, Sebastian.
So, I will start directly with a question that I know about you. You started a very interesting project. It's called Culturtech. It's a digital library for the French institutes. And it intrigued me because in cultural industries, there's maybe a gap between the government and the other, let's say, industries. And what can you tell us about this project? Why is it so dear to you, and how far has it gone?
First of all, as a diplomat, I was always specialized in digital diplomacy. For 10 years, I was a spokesperson, including a president, Jacques Chirac, European Commission as a spokesperson, minister, head of the press service. And it was during those periods when you see a shift in technology. It was always for me very interesting. And as well, I started my career in the Ministry of Culture. It was much before, the younger generation went digital or social networks. It was when really you were questioning the technology. What would be the international world best use of technologies, and how would diplomacy being changed by technology, which was quite evident, but at some point you had alternatives. We in France are a lot specialized in cultural diplomacy. As you know, in Bucharest, we have a French institute with antennas, Iași, Timișoara, Cluj. So it has always been very strong that we go for culture and we go for education, both sectors being part of the diplomatic service. And as well, one of the ministers offered me to switch to culture, and that was my first project. So as a matter of fact, not speaking about words, but speaking about actions, I was very, very concrete at that time. I was director of the French Institute in London, and we managed to have a lot of questioning with digital companies and innovation companies, and one of them proposed to us to make a library which would be digital, and immediately we saw the interest of it. Because
when was that?
It was 2009. Just before that, there was the big question about cinemas. Cinemas in France are very strong, and we were putting in the diplomatic pouch all those big films, which at that time physically took time, but also cost a lot. And at some point, the diplomatic pouch said, but can you do something which is lighter in terms of costs? And we started in 2008 to digitalize the first cinema in the French network, and that was London. At that time, there was a lot of questioning about would be the movies at the same quality? What should we do with the concrete aspects of movies? Which part of the industry would switch digital? And by the way, in London, it was obvious that we would directly jump on new technologies on both aspects. The beginning of digital libraries started with public libraries in France. it was a very strong public policy which didn't exist in the UK unless you went to universities. But if you went to Oxbridge or all the publishing in the UK, you find immediately that they had gone digital. And so this was this double interest to have digital catalogs, to have digital research, but also to give to the normal public and the learners of French a capacity from home to just register and to read the book. And it also allowed you to put a audiobook, for instance, or videos which would be on the learning track with a very strong editing of it. So this first project, 2009, which was launched in London, then when I came back to Paris, 2010, became a world project. And until today, we have Culture Tech, this digital library of French books, French audiobooks, but also dictionaries, etc. Part of your registration, if you go to the French Institute in Bucharest, when you register to the library, you have an access to a digital library, which is very interesting in terms of education, but also in terms of influence, because we stepped suddenly into a new era. You know, in Africa, how much complicated it was to send books. The publishing houses had difficulties to sell even education books for the schools. So it was a huge range of new cooperation that were open through this tool. Of course, it's a long time ago. Technologies change a lot. We, for instance, switched. It was first of all not done for smartphones, and of course, today everybody should go on smartphones or tablets. That was also something which was very much backed by our public authorities. Always when we were discussing about public diplomacy, influence, education, and culture, you see that France were interested in innovation and also in the parts of the regulation of the innovation. That part of our values as diplomats.
So congratulations for that project. I've seen that you already have a strong presence worldwide in the United States and everywhere, and there are audiobooks for children, and that you're doing a great job. And I'm personally involved in a project for traceability using blockchain for books in Africa. So I know exactly what you mean by that. So would you please tell us what is your experience with technology and blockchain in particular? We've had some private discussions on these topics, and I was amazed to see what your answer was. So what is your experience with technology and blockchain in particular?
Actually, you know, diplomacy is the art of everything. It's about communication among governments, but it's also the way to prepare the future. It's also the way to help the regulation about future technologies and innovation. And that was also a very strong part of French presidency of the Council of the European Union. You know, if you could not just say, okay, the market is going, but what is our role as diplomats? We would have missed a lot of things, including the environmental challenge. If you just decide that blockchain develops and you're not interested into this, you miss a lot in digital diplomacy. So my interest, of course, started with generally digital diplomacy. You know, we were speaking about, for instance, hybrid wars. We were speaking about, of course, the difficulty of trafficking on the net. Cybersecurity is the big issue in diplomacy. But little by little, I had to get acquainted with those new challenges, just because in every country, when I was a director for education and culture in Paris, every country was dedicated to this. We also had an ambassador appointed as a digital ambassador for France, and he was very, very busy. And at some point, I wanted him and me to make the link between those issues about influence, normal diplomacy, etc. As a personal, of course, when you are involved in society, you have a lot of friends, a lot of the new generation who is dedicated to those new, I would say, professional tools. It's not only that as a diplomat, my kids, none of them went into diplomacy, but they still were raised as world kids. So they traveled, a lot digital natives, and I would say that all of them, in one way or another, are working with this technology. So my acquaintance with blockchain was more precise when I had to keep a dialogue with my son, who decided to create a company with blockchain technology. And if I wanted to understand what he was doing, it was necessary. But it was not only a question of a family, it was also a question of professional tools. You know, during, I would say, the 2 or 3 last 4 years, if you didn't enter into the understanding of what is a NFT, what is a blockchain, what is a market, or what is the finance which is there, even the French tech, the new ecosystem of French tech would be something of unknown territory for me. So if you want to understand what is our society today, you have to understand what is the blockchain.
I'm amazed by your point of view, because usually there's a discrepancy in between government officials and the new technology trends, and I'm so happy that I see someone speaking the same language and understanding in depth what is it about. So that leads to my next question. What do you think the role of technology is in the current geopolitical landscape? A lot has changed in the last few months. And as you mentioned, cybersecurity is a huge threat. The war that we have today actually started long before the invasion of Ukraine, so on a technology level. So what is the role of technology in the geopolitical landscape today?
Yeah. So first of all, if you take those two elements, blockchain and cryptocurrency, crypto, you know, even 3 years ago, it was about technological science, computer science. It was about academic topics. And I must say that there was an acceleration of things. And today it's not. It's about international relations. It's about, for instance, governments trying to understand better how you handle those technologies. For instance, it's not only a question of regulation, it's a question of values, but also it's a question of preparing and using the tools for cooperation, governmental cooperation. Everybody knows that since 2018, you had some governments experiencing tools, for instance, for helping in humanitarian contacts, the refugees without papers, so traceability of some groups of people that were internationals or suffered a lot. And so that was, for instance, a project that interested me a lot under United Nations. They launched a kind of pilot group working on blockchain to see how humanitarian systems should be impacted by the blockchain. But you have plenty of examples. Of course, first of all, it started by the fintech. It started to secure the contracts. It started to see how you could avoid intermediaries, because this is what it is. It is a decentralized tool to help actually the different aspect of the chain to be more efficient. So that was, of course, the first idea. And then it developed into very interesting tools, in my view, which can be of a very large aspect. For instance, private contracts, cadastre. One huge country decided to make a pilot project about we do on the blockchain all the maps and the cadastre. And so you have the validation aspects of what is in archives or in a very complicated computer, which can be done very precisely and very efficiently on the blockchain. Of course, as you rightly mentioned, Sebastian, in the last 6 months, we were all about what is happening with this new war. Do we have a changing of methodology in the way of influencing, for instance, the public opinions after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia? The aggression for us was under the idea that besides this idea that we would enter into a hybrid war, because we knew how influential Russia could be. For instance, in our elections, if you remember, we had in talks,
Yes.
we had campaigns,
Fake news.
we had a lot. Fake news. We tried to create a French word for it with l'Institut de France, because otherwise everybody in France was using fake news in.
And what is it in French? How do you say fake news in French?
So we created. It was one of the group I was dealing with on education aspects, and that was so interesting because, of course, it was beyond diplomats. It was about how the new world of technology enters into the French vocabulary, and how the media should actually get appropriate terms to be able, of course, to fight it. If you are not there to, and so you already had intox. Intox means intoxication, and we created infox.
Infox.
Les infox, but also it was the period when in 2019 where all the newspapers and the media were eager to develop a Czech news service. And so it was a dialogue with the media as well, not only l'Académie Française, but as well all the people in the sector, to create those kinds of countermeasures,
checks and balances
against what we were suffering with. So to come back to Ukraine and hybrid war, actually no, it happened to be a classical war with the arms, enemies, etc., and information services, etc., etc. But at this stage, of course, as everybody knows, I would say enfoncer les portes ouvertes in French,
open doors.
because it would be, of course, something that everybody know. It was also about kind of a value campaign through internet. So it was a huge challenge for the Ukrainian president to be first, to be assertive about the illegal, of course, invasion, but also with no reason. And I must say that during the different conferences, or even in the different facts in our relationship with Ukrainian authorities and president, it was an amazingly effective use of social networks. If you take what happens in Russia, where you don't use Facebook because they are forbidden, it's only Telegram, and you realize that the first head of state to be present on Telegram is President Zelensky, you realize how actually war is not so simple. It's not only on the ground with armaments, but it's also an element of this cyber war. At this stage, conventional war is what we see, conventional media as well, but also now what we have to handle is the consequences of this situation. So as we know, economy is at stake, but also social cohesion in Europe, etc. And it is true that it's a communication war, it's an opinion war. So why do I take those two examples? Just to show how government should be involved and why we should be involved. Because it's really the decision makers. If the citizens elected their governments, it's not just to look at what is happening on their new technologies. It's also to have an impact.
Well, people usually think that the war is happening only on the ground, and actually, it's a hybrid war. And in the last few months, there's a report coming out that 42 countries were actually attacked by Russia in the last few months alone. So 42 countries. It's not the war is not only happening in Ukraine, and it's happening in a technological level in another at least 42 countries. But I wanted to ask you about Unfox. um, are we living in a post-truth era? It's a question that I also asked Mr. Ambassador Doro Costa, Romanian ambassador to China previously. Are we living in a post-truth era of fake news, of Unfox, or is technology actually able to help us to deter this threat? Because it is a threat. Who's checking what is fake or not, what is real or not? Do we have these checks and balances on? And how does the technology may help us in deterring this threat?
I would say, as France is really the country of positivism and rationalism, that unless it's proven on the contrary, we are going to fight again a fox or fake news or those kind of hybrid attacks with all the tools we have. And we have tools. If you go again on the international level, you see that the European there is since 4 years, it was created in 2018, European blockchain partnership, which developed in European blockchain service infrastructure, which means, and Ukraine was accepted in this new 30 members, European members. So when we share values, when we decide to arbitrate and to actually not let it go as it is, but to put rules, to regulate, which is, I'm sorry, because sometimes in Romania it doesn't look appropriate that the state decides to regulate. But that's really what we try to do at the European level, not to leave possibilities for instance, piracy. To enter the blockchain technology. Let's never forget that a technology is what you do with it. It's not as such good or bad.
Yes.
It's a question of how we try to arbitrate in a dialogue between public and private partnership to use it in the right direction. If you look at what happens in Africa with the blockchain or cryptocurrencies, you see that you still should be very careful so that the regulations can be applied. I'm thinking about, of course, your private data, for instance. Your private data. We should give guarantees that the individuals who are using blockchain can have a guarantee, and we have ways to prevent that. For instance, money or data has been stolen or been used. And there is another stake. The technology, we saw it because, of course, there was a big speculation on cryptocurrencies, and so the market is going up and down, and each person I meet asks me, do you still believe in NFTs? Do you still believe that there is a future, an economic future, a sound economic future about this? And the big challenge today is, if you use the computers, is to check that it has an environmentally secured chain as well. If you have 19 millions of computer working on the big data to influence blockchain tools to give this and this and this, of course, it's bad. It's preferable that you have less computers and not as well a concentration of actors, that you should be careful that it doesn't become a technology only owned by one country. For instance, when you saw what was happening with the social networks, and you see the big fight on one side, Facebook, Meta, and TikTok, etc., you see that's something which has to be discussed among governments and economies. So we don't just are passive and we just see our kids being in those systems without any reflection on it. It's like culture tech, by the way. You know, culture tech, the interest of those kind of initiative is that the world of the internet is interesting when you have content which are being put in the proper direction. If you go on internet just to find fake news, the world is wrong. If you go to internet to find educational content, it's great.
So I have to ask you then, as everyone else, do you believe in NFTs?
I'm very much interested in NFTs. Very much interested. As a person who dedicated a lot of years in culture and suffered during the pandemic situation to see all our cultural institutions, including the main institutions such as Le Louvre, you know, we had 12 million visitors at some point, and suddenly nothing for 18 months. You have to reflect on that. Again, in my experience in the UK, I was very, very much interested and linked to what had done the British Council, digitalizing the collections and being able to give it to the larger number of people. For instance, then we realized that we had objects which belong to other civilization. Internet is a huge tool to open the minds. So being a person dedicated a lot to education and culture, it always interested me because of different aspects. You know, for instance, if you are a museum and you look for sponsorship for doing your exhibitions, I could mention today the museums in Romania. We are looking for help, you know, on many aspects to bring the people in, to refurbish, renovate the content, to make it interesting, to transform it into an educational program, because it's not only because you see a Grigorescu that suddenly you understand this period of Romania, the influence, etc. It should be, you need a mediation. And also because on the NFTs allowed you a new transaction, you know? Otherwise it's what? It's a museum, you buy a ticket, you go there, you look with your eyes, full stop. NFT would open plenty other of capacities, possibilities. So of course it interests a lot. It is so much interesting for collectors, art dealers. You can have, and again, it's like the other example of editorializing your content. It only has a value if you assess the quality of your work. You know, it's not only if you make hundreds of copies of something that makes an NFT. The blockchain technology allows you to assess that you have an expertise on this book or this painting, and you can go further on. So I'm very much interested in those, and maybe it helps you not going to take the plane to go to the Louvre and etc. It will open a new period, a new area for the Louvre, you know.
So that's a very interesting use case in the cultural industries. However, we've all seen that Ukraine used NFTs to fund their efforts. They issued NFTs to fund their war efforts, and that's unique. We wouldn't have thought about this 1 year ago. What is your take then on state actors using NFTs, maybe to add to their, let's say, issuing assets or to add to their certificates, digital identity. Is that feasible? Is that an option maybe for states, not only for cultural institutions, but for the actual state?
It's an innovation market at this stage. I don't know. I don't know how the transaction, the interest of the public sectors. I don't know how it will develop. The only thing I know is that I feel it's very interesting, as all the metaverse is. And even if you have up and downs, and the application of that principle takes more time, and you see actually options being developed where you didn't think of, this is still very interesting. And so for me, is the whole aspect. For a long time, you had a barrier, a separation between what was going to the public sector and what was private, what the transaction was. Here, with this is what is interesting very much. You can see NFTs being used in orientations that you didn't expect. It's like the startups, first of all, when you had only 2 or 3 of them, you thought, but really, what's the use? If it's to bring a meal home, I know the restaurant I go, I take. For instance, I'm very much interested in Romania and in seeing how you can have the development of BlaBlaCar. Because BlaBlaCar it makes that you don't have one car for one person, but you can really mutualize a lot. Or the one for doctors taking appointments, it was a huge success. In only 6 months, everybody, including the public hospitals, they are doing with this private application for all their taking their appointments. So I'm not in a position to tell you, yes, there is a big program in the minister of this or this, because I don't know, and it's not my role. But I feel it's interesting. And my colleague Henri Verdier, for instance, who is in charge of digital diplomacy, I was asking him before I came, are you coming to Bucharest? Because there is this huge meeting end of September in Bucharest about international telecom union, and he said he didn't know, because there is there as well the link to be done between the normal communication sector and or what is offered by NFTs. So I would say it's a work in progress. Governments, in that perspective, have, of course, a regulation role. We have to check that it goes in a proper direction.
Of course.
Towards social relations, economy, and of course towards citizens. We have this role as Europeans, but also in terms of, I think OECD as well has a role in that perspective. Now, Romania is working to join OECD. It's one of the roles of OECD. It's part of the economic development.
So throughout history, we've seen and that new technologies have been perceived as demolishers of old systems. And video killed the radio star, right? And we've seen cars killing the carriages and horse and carriages industry and so on. Is maybe decentralization a threat to governments? I know it's a big question, and if you read the Bitcoin paper, you see that there's no government mentioned there. It's just mentioned a peer-to-peer cashless system that may allow people to do transactions without intermediaries, and then that leads to the question, do we still need central authorities or not? And that's why maybe it may be said that blockchain could be a threat to governments. What is your take on that? Is this a real threat or not? Do we see a new technology as a threat or maybe as an enabler?
You know, the fact that this technology allows validation, a more decentralized type of validation or type of projects without intermediary, this is good. We don't need to interfere in that perspective. So in my view, the point is not there. The point is about checking the big structure of it, carbon print, for instance, where concentration, regulation, if in case of piracy, you know, or in case if you are stolen, that's also you don't have a other way to handle
With great
it.
power comes great responsibility.
Exactly.
You own the keys, and then there's no one to turn to if you
Well,
lose your funds.
Of course, it's only a beginning about that. And as I said, it's not to the governments to say in which direction this technology should develop. So it's for me quite clear that we are there as stakeholders. We are not there to contradict or to oppose or to try to
Stop, maybe.
to manage or to regulate it, but we have to be there anyhow because of the internationalization of it is obvious. If you take another sector, that's environment. You know, 40 years ago, environment was about your garden. You were handling locally your environment. And now it's not even the governments who can deal it. It's absolutely global. And so so is the internet. So is this notion of metaverse. So let's be modest, but work on it.
So France is one of the world's leaders in innovation, and I was wondering if you are aware on how France is using blockchain for its advantage.
This I couldn't say because, of course, in my view, what I know is about the technologies used. For instance, in security, in contracts, in a lot of sectors. Of course, video games, because when you have those currencies, you have to use it. Investment. For instance, if you know this, we created not only an ambassador about it, but we created some structures about these technologies, Binance, so structures to help the companies to invest on the blockchain. So it's an ecosystem, I would say, today, which is growing and which is being cared by the French government.
We are right now in an ongoing technology competition, to say the least, with China. And I was wondering, what is your take on how will and how does Europe keep its place in the race?
So that's why I was mentioning what was going on in the European Union, because that's quite important that we about values, about the fact that we don't go against it. We go with understanding what assets can this new technology provide, and we provide for the proper fora to discuss about it and to yes, to assess what opportunities it can provide for Europe. This is a competition. I agree with you. So in my view, I read what we had done during French presidency. The idea is to developing the potential of on all aspects. It's not only about protection against fraud, checking the authenticity, checking, securing the that's the point of on NFTs, for instance, to be sure that you're not buying something which is fake. But it's also about pushing the innovation, being able to encourage at some point European larger companies into these sectors, the different sectors. Security is one. You know, we have a lot of, I was mentioning refugees, the fact that they travel with only a smartphone, they don't have a pile of documents with them, etc., etc. For Frontex, it's also very important. So security of the persons, bio data, etc., etc.
So as we are coming to the end of this edition, I would like to know, what do you think? How do you think the metaverse will impact our society? I mean, the new generation is already living in the metaverse. My daughter, I think she lives more in Roblox than she does in the real world. How do you think it will impact our society, the metaverse, the augmented reality, maybe virtual reality?
So maybe it's because I'm of an older generation. For me, it's complementary to concrete experiences, when I see the new generation, of course, they are totally embedded in this new technology and this new world. And it's this sector which offer them professional opportunities, all of them, or experiences, for instance, creating mathematical classes on YouTube, which allows one of my kids to be able to not to go to his pupils, but be able to have, so that's fantastic for them. But I strongly believe that we will never quit the normal world. You know, we are not going to be accompanied only by machines. We need
For now.
we need concrete things. That was obvious for me after the pandemic period, you know. Some of our habits of not moving, staying with the smaller clusters of people will stay. But other habits, that's the genius of humankind, you know, makes us going to see, to meet, to feel concerts, music, etc., etc. Of course, it's super on a screen, and we all took over those new experiences. But by the way, we still are so much. It's so much important to go in your garden, to see your plants, to touch this table. That this table is being made by wood, by somebody, etc., etc. It's not our roots. This is my personal feeling. It's not a governmental position, you know. We are going to see in the next steps how it will develop.
I see it happening right now in this interview. I perceive it as having a lot of more value because it's happening live. It's happening in a physical realm. If it would have been on Zoom, it would have been maybe a bit more impersonal, and it would have another flavor. However, maybe the new generation will not see things as we do. And I would like to finish by asking you a more vague question, let's say, but it may be something that it's dear to you. How do you see the future of digital diplomacy?
Digital diplomacy is growing immensely. If you take when I was a spokesperson, you know, we were little by little putting on internet some contents, and today the spokesperson, she's making small videos on the same format that we could have on on TikTok, for instance, or the president is on TikTok. President Macron started to do videos in such formats. So we are strongly impacted. And we're also impacted because we are living in a huge network, and it is an asset. You know, when you have 167 embassies throughout the world, the day you decide you want to show an image from Fiji or for wherever, Honduras, you can do it. And that also was proven during the French presidency. You know, at some point we were doing amazing things, sending an image of a coffee in Bucharest and having European Coffee's digital day on the 5th of March. It was Café Europa. And it worked. I mean, it's like that. So digital diplomacy is only at its beginning. It can have so many developments. Of course, it's communication, but it's also explaining the world. If you take, for instance, the crisis in Ukraine, we are at the border. But can you imagine when the French members of parliament arrived, half of them or most of them had never seen Romania. So it's also an asset. You know, as an ambassador, you are here as an intermediate. You are a mediator for, of course, the cooperation between the two countries, but also for getting an image, a correct image of the country you are posted in into your own capital. And that was strong, very strong during this crisis. Everybody today sees Romania as a welcoming country. And I experienced that because I was on holiday in France, and I was asked by some people in the markets, oh, you are a diplomat, where are you, Romania? And everybody was almost bursting into tears, saying, please send back to Romania the thanks we all need to give to the country for its attitudes since the bursting of the war. So you can do that in many ways. I also strongly believe our role is not just, you can say, Romania is a nice country and you should visit it. It doesn't work like that. Yes, diplomacy is a very complicated type of images, prejudices, historical links, and it's again a question of being able to use the good material at the good period to make it work and actions. So at the end of the day, I think if we always was happy to do my job, is because I strongly believe that through innovation we can be more efficient. You know, we can transmit hundreds of times more information than 20 years ago. So
you seem to have all the questions, all the answers to my questions, and that's amazing because I see that you are very knowledgeable and on these topics, which you wouldn't really expect from a diplomat. You would say maybe they're in politics, communication, and so on. And I'm very thrilled to have had you here. And I was wondering, maybe you can recommend a book for the viewers and for me also. What would be something interesting that you think I must read?
Of course, you have plenty of books between France and Romania, but when you finish a period of crisis, what I would recommend to everybody, because it was a shock, is the type of books you can read which gives you a historical background and a deepness. You know, for my first year in Romania, I didn't go, for instance, to Izacea. There was not even a border there. And then suddenly, from 24th of February, I went there something like every week. I was going to, and I felt so strongly the need to read, to be able to think, and to be able to adapt to the shock we all had. And so, as you told me, Sebastian, that you would ask me this question: what is a book you need and you want? I remember what I did during my summer. It was not 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I would have said very much romantic thing. You know, I'm graduated with English literature. I would have thought about a woman's book like Marguerite Duras or Jane Austen. But no, in the summer, I took Panay Istrati, who is this incredible Romanian author who traveled. So he traveled, and he wrote books in both languages. So I had the chance last time I went to Galatz and to Braila to visit an amazing library, which is Eugène Ionesco. And they offered me a book which is written from Panay Istrati. One page is in French, one page is in Romanian. And little by little, you deeply appreciate, because it's an author who actually was there in the 20s, who was friend with authors, and he actually describes how it was at that period. And what I see is that it was amazingly multicultural. On some parts of the Danube, they were speaking Russian, that we all know, you know, Lipoven. They were coming from Egypt. It was the place of the International Commission of the Danube as well. And it was such an important place for trade, for human exchanges, and so many people came from the Delta. So many people emigrated to France. His friends were so numerous, and if you take all those French people who were from Romania, you see a lot of people coming from those two cities. So Panay Istrati, a little bit old writer, but showing that translation is important, communication is important, and as well background on your own history. And at this point, France and Romania, they are like that, you know. So history was also the same in that period, through human beings going in traveling and doing the link between the cultures and the languages. So sorry, it's not very fashionable. I don't have my personal
It's
development,
perfect.
but when you ask me about innovation and technology, I answer history. Know where you come from. You are much stronger then, and you absorb the shocks. You know, you absorb the changes because you have strong feet on the ground.
Thank you for your recommendation. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation for this interview. It's been great, and I hope we may have again in the near future a new discussion about the topics that we've had today with a different perspective, with the war ended. And I would like to thank Netopia Payments for sponsoring this show, and let's all be more peaceful from now on.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.